What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. My name is Mitch Mann, and I am going to be walking through some of the details today on a topic that I've had a lot of questions about, and I've had a lot of questions asked of me about, and one that I think a lot of people are really interested to know more of, and that is we are going through and comparing two of the top tier wake boat brands. And what I'm going to do is basically go from A to Z, walking through every single aspect of the boats and just talking about what different ones do better, what ones do worse, and how they compare just one against another. Now, the two boats that we're going to talk about today are Centurion and Mastercraft. Um, they both build top tier surf boats. They're both excellent players in the game. They do a fantastic job. They're both great boats to surf behind. And so let's jump into the details about what makes them different from one another, what some of their design philosophies are, why you might want one boat versus another. And we're going to get kind of in the weeds on this and jump through all the different little aspects of the boats. But for those of you that really want to know this information, this will probably be super, super helpful. Now, first off, let's talk about the brands in general, just their design philosophy that they have and where they're positioned as companies. Now, both of these have been towboat brands that have been in existence for a very, very long time. Mastercraft has been around over 50 years. Centurion's approaching that here in a number of years. They've been around for a very long time, originally building water ski boats, direct drive tournament boats, and eventually progressing up to making surf boats. Mastercraft still builds a tournament direct drive ski boat, which is phenomenal. It's the Pro Star. It's amazing. If you're into hardcore water skiing in a buoy course, it's fantastic. If you're not, it's really not good at anything else. But they do a great job there. But for this case, we're going to be talking about the surf boats specifically, which in Mastercraft's line, they have broken up into three different series. They have the NXT series, the XT series, and the X series. So basically, each time they add a letter, the boat goes down a notch. So the X series is their top of the line, highest end boats that they make, a 22, 24, and 26 footer. And they also do their Star series is what they refer to it. But basically, essentially, they have an X Star or an X Star S that really kind of fits in the X series. They do a few things that are slightly different on it, but it's kind of a modified X series. So they have the X22, the X24, the X26, and the X Star, which is a 23 footer that currently in 2023 model year, they do in a X Star and X Star S. The only difference between them is just the transom design and seat configuration that they have back there. So that's the X series. Then they have the XT series, which is kind of their mid-range crossover style boat, is essentially what it's designed as. That's not as nice as the X series, but it's a step above the NXTs. This boat is primarily more designed as what's referred to as a crossover, meaning that it's a good surf boat, but it's also, I should say it's a surf boat that's also designed to water ski as well at the same time. So it's kind of a multi-sport application. Essentially, it means it's not exceptionally good at any of them. But if you're going to be doing a lot of water skiing, but also still going to be surfing a fair bit and kind of want a boat that does everything, it does an okay job at everything across the board. And there's some ways you can modify it to make it better at surfing, but it would make it so it's not as good of a ski boat and vice versa. Then they also have the XNXT line, which is kind of their budget-based boat. Mastercraft's a little different compared to other brands where they don't really have a sub-brand. So what I mean sub-brand is, think in the car world, Toyota versus Lexus. There's a lot of different examples of that. But that same type of thing exists in the boat world. So you have Centurion and Supreme as their sub-brand. You have Malibu and Axis. You have Supra and Moomba. Taiga ATX. There's basically every other boat brand that has a higher tier and a lower tier. They have them split into two different brands. And part of the reason for that is they don't want to have a boat that's on a more basic design frame philosophy. That it shares the same name as the ones that are ultra premium. Mastercraft decided that they just wanted to make Mastercraft across the board, and the NXT series is kind of their budget line. I hesitate saying budget because, I mean, we're still talking about boats that are $100,000 plus. They're not cheap, but they're not in the same realm as the XT and the X series boats in Mastercraft's line. They're much more in line with what you'd expect with a Supreme, Moomba, Axis, something along those lines. So that's kind of the structure that they run into with their boats. Centurion, on the other hand, they have Supreme, which is their subline. So they really, in this discussion, we're not really going to be talking about the Mastercraft NXT series at all. We're going to be talking about the XT series and the X series, and how they specifically compare against Centurion, which Centurion has two series of boats, the FI and the RI series. Now, between those, little bit different philosophy there. Centurion doesn't really have a crossover edition, or they're like, the FI series is not really designed to be a multi-sport application. It's designed to be a surf boat. It still does have some ability to water ski behind it, but like, quite frankly, the water ski wake behind the XT series Mastercraft is going to be far substantially better, just because it's designed for that intention. So the FI series and the RI series for Centurion, they share a lot of similar characteristics, same hull design, same philosophy of building a surf boat, but the FI series is a little bit more of a sportier application and design, and then the RI series is a little bit bigger and more luxurious type of feel and design to it. Really, if you look at between the two different boats, they've got different body lines, different overall designs and feels. The FI is a slightly lower profile boat. It's got a more aggressive body line characteristics to it, as well as on as far as the series breakdown between them. The RI series comes standard with a lot of different features that are optional on the FI, like sliding bench seats or flip-up transom seats at the back of the boat, and just different things like that. So if you want to have a more a la carte experience or want a more sporty design, the FI is the route that a lot of people want to go. If you're just looking for the best overall design and the most luxurious feel, and you're wanting to add all the bells and whistles to it, the RI is going to be a really great pick on that end. So that's kind of the difference as far as the design philosophy between the boats. One thing I will add as far as the overall philosophy is their hull designs are very, very different, mainly because Mastercraft, when they created their initial hull designs, they kind of modified their ski boat heritage over time, where Centurion took a really hard, sharp right turn, actually back in about 2002. When they came out with a boat called the Avalanche, and this boat had an actual V hull in the bottom, and they actually designed it as more of a kind of cruising and wakeboard application, just to make something that was kind of different, unique, and split the difference between a stern drive runabout boat and a standard wakeboard boat. And it's kind of evolved and changed from there, and really led into the bloodlines that's led to their surf philosophy. So Mastercraft is a lot more wakeboard, water ski focus, which if you look at like their professional athlete mix, that's typically what it is. They've got a lot of pro skiers, a lot of wakeboarders, a couple professional surfers now. But for the most part, they're not heavily invested in the surf game. Where on the Centurion side of the spectrum, it's almost the complete opposite. They have a couple wakeboarders that ride behind the boats. They don't have a professional skier at all on their pro team, and they've got, I'd say almost at this point, the majority of professional surfers ride behind Centurions. So it's a very strong mix. Now, we're talking about the brand. One of the other interesting philosophies that Mastercraft has is they've kind of gotten to where they do their own specific version of everything. So like they do their own. Their motors are done by Ilmor, which is exclusive to Mastercraft. It's a GM, General Motors platform, similar to what we run in Centurions with PCMs, but they are specific to Mastercraft. Their audio systems by Klipsch. Some of their just overall design areas, like they do a splined shaft design that's kind of unique and different. There's some ups and downs to this. So when it comes to this, Mastercraft has a lot of their own components, a lot of their own things that are very specific to Mastercraft. There's some advantages to this. They do some specific designs and that, like their spline shaft system is kind of cool. It makes it so that the prop doesn't move quite as easily. So there's some advantages to some of the different things that Mastercraft does specific. The downside on it, though, is that it means that their parts are, in some cases, a lot harder to find, and they're generally quite a bit more expensive. So a perfect example is that propeller that I mentioned. So spline shafts are only on Mastercrafts in the towboat world. So if you're at a lake and end up whacking and hitting a prop and you need to get a replacement, if you're a repair shop, you might have replacements of other common size propellers. Chances are you're probably not going to have a Mastercraft propeller unless you're a Mastercraft dealer. And the reason why is because they will only fit on a Mastercraft, where on your other props will fit on literally everything. Malibu, Nautique, Centurion, Supra, all of those may run slightly different dimensions of propellers, but they'll typically have one that will probably work if you needed to have a replacement, where on a Mastercraft it's a little bit different. So there are pluses and minuses to that philosophy, but Mastercraft does kind of their own specific version of everything, and chances are, in order to get any work done and get anything repaired or fixed or whatever, you have to take it in directly to a Mastercraft dealership, where Centurion is going to be a little bit different. There's some of the stuff, not everything obviously, but a few more of the things like your shafts, your props, other different elements on the boat that you can get them. Some of the different motor components, those are things that are a little bit more common just because they're shared across the board. You have some different, like impellers as an example. Centurion runs the same impeller as Nautique. They run the same impeller as actually a few other different motor manufacturers. In some cases, Malibu and Axis. Where it's going to be different when it comes to something like Mastercraft. So now that we've covered that, just the general design philosophy, let's talk about the boats themselves. Now, I want to hit on and talk about the first thing, which is probably the most important thing, the thing that, if you're listening to this, you probably care about the most by far, and that is the performance aspect of the boats, how they drive, how they surf, how they wakeboard, how they do all of those different things. So I've had the opportunity to spend a fair bit of time on Mastercrafts, surfing behind them, wakeboarding behind them, skiing behind them, some different things. I haven't been behind every boat in the Mastercraft line, like I haven't surfed behind the X26 specifically, but I've spent time behind an X24 and an X22. From my understanding, from the feedback I get from everyone across the board, is that like the X26 is not that much different than an X24. So there's some different aspects of that I can hit on and drive into. But what it really comes down to with performance, there's a few things we need to talk about. The first one is we need to talk about the hull design. Second one is we need to talk about the surf systems. Third thing is we need to talk about the ballast of the boats. And fourth, we need to talk about the dash systems, the controls, just the drivability and such of the boats. So first one, and probably the most notable and the biggest one by far, and the one that if I'm making a purchase decision between a Mastercraft and a Centurion, the item that's going to come into that's going to have the biggest weight in that discussion is going to be the hull design of the boat. So when we're talking about hull designs, we're really talking about two entirely different design philosophies. And I alluded to this earlier, but you have a Centurion that has the Opta-V hull design, and you have Mastercraft that has their own hull design. They don't really have a name for it necessarily, but they've got their own specific hull. Now, a lot of times people look at hull designs and they're looking at things like the shape of the bow, like a pickle fork versus the traditional. That won't actually have much of any impact at all on the way. It will have some impact on water coming over the front of the bow, and things of that nature, but won't really have much of any difference as far as the way the boat drives, handles. Certainly doesn't do much as to the way it surfs or wakeboards or anything of that nature. So you can take that and throw it out, whether we're talking about the pickle fork bow on the Centurion FI or on the Mastercraft X series or things like that, versus a more traditional style like a Centurion RI, or modified traditional, I should say, versus Mastercraft's some of the boats in their XT line or things of that nature. It doesn't really make a difference. What it comes down to is the shape of the running surface at the water line and below. So what you really are dealing with is you're dealing with two kind of different design philosophies I alluded to. The first one is Mastercraft's, which has more of a flat hull shape that was specifically tooled around creating a great water ski wake and creating a great wakeboard wake. And then you have Centurion, that the design philosophy has shifted and gone to where it's specifically designed around creating the best possible surf wave, and then wakeboarding and water skiing are second and really distant third. I mean, it's really wakeboarding and then making it so it has a decent recreational water ski wake. That's about the extent of it from a water ski standpoint. So let's talk about why. So the big one is Mastercraft has a more flat hull design specifically to throw out at this point a better wakeboard wake if you're talking about like their X series boats, but then they tool it and make it even more flat and displace less water when you go the XT series, specifically for water skiing. The reason they do this is when you start talking about like wakeboard wakes as an example, if you put a bunch of additional weight into a boat, if it has a flat surface, it's going to be able to be more balanced, and it's going to displace more water as you add more weight to the boat. The dynamics of the different aspects to the running surface don't really change that much as you add more weight if it's a flatter hull shape. So this is something I've had the experience of having Harley Clifford, which is Mastercraft's elite level wakeboard athlete, actually out on a boat with me behind a Centurion, actually, wakeboarding behind the boat. And we were talking about wakeboard wakes. And Harley Clifford was mentioning just that the wakeboard wake, at this point, it was on a Centurion RI 237. It was before the new edition RI 230 or 245. But he was saying that the wakeboard wake on the 237 was actually really good. The difference is that he was pointing out that we had full stock ballast on the boat, which was about 5,100 pounds of ballast, a lot of weight, more weight than most people ever run while they're wakeboarding. But he was pointing out the shape of the wake, that if we were to continue to add more weight to the boat, let's say that we added another 2,000 pounds of additional weight, whether it's steel or water bags that we put in the boat, and take it up to 7,000 pounds of ballast, that the wake would probably eventually fold over, or we would have to drive faster to maintain the same wake shape. Now, we didn't want to ride at 26 miles an hour if we added that additional weight in the boat. So we were kind of capped out at about the max ballast. And that's typically the case behind a Centurion. You're going to be able to put the max ballast into the boat. You're probably not going to be able to add a whole lot more beyond that. Now, on the Mastercraft, however, Harley will add, I don't even know what he's doing at this point, but at the time, he was adding 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of additional ballast above the stock ballast that the Mastercraft came with. Now, his boat was a Mastercraft X-Star. It has about 4,000 pounds of ballast. So if he's adding 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, I mean, we're talking about 7,000 to 8,000 pounds of ballast in this boat. It's an absolutely absurd amount. And really what happens is they put as much weight in the boat as it can handle and still get up on plane at sea level with the biggest engine you could put in it. I've had the opportunity to be behind a boat like that down in Florida. And it's pretty unreal. The wake is absolutely massive. Now, if you're going to do that with a wakeboard, then realistically, like a Mastercraft X-Star is kind of the ideal boat to go with. It's got a flatter hull shape. It's not going to be as weight sensitive when you put all of that weight into the boat. So the wake is going to maintain cleanliness on both sides of the wake without having to run a higher speed. And it's just going to maintain an overall better balance, and the wake is going to be a little more rounded and eventually pitch up and get steeper as you add more and more weight to it. On the other side of the spectrum, on a Centurion, you're kind of capped out at max ballast. Now, 99% of people will never wakeboard with beyond stock ballast, and we actually have a video where we show stock ballast on like an RI 230 and wakeboarding behind it, and the wake is borderline scary. But if you're going to go to that pro level wakeboard approach, that's going to be where the Mastercraft really excels. If we're talking about the boats that are specifically designed for better wakeboard wake, like the X-Star and X22, maybe even an X24, that type of thing. The NXT will not be that same experience. The NXT is going to be a little different. It's not going to be as good of a wakeboard wake. In fact, honestly, probably not even as good of a wakeboard wake as the Centurion FI is, mainly just because of the design philosophy of having it be a better ski wake. So if you're going to be skiing a lot, Mastercraft XT series is great. If you're going to be wakeboarding with a crazy amount of ballast in the boat, Mastercraft X series is great. If we're talking about recreational wakeboarding or wakeboarding, if you're going up to doing 720s type thing, so I mean, still a really good wakeboarder. The Centurion will be plenty. A Mastercraft X series with stock ballast will probably be plenty. And Mastercraft XT series will be acceptable and probably get you kind of where you need to go on a wakeboard. Now, when we're talking about surfing, this is where things kind of flip around a little bit. Centurion has a hull design that's specifically designed for surfing. They put ballast in the boat specifically designed for surfing. That's why they pack so much ballast, nearly 6,000 pounds of stock. And the reason they do all of that is to throw a superior wake surf wave. Now, the biggest difference as far as the wake surf waves between a Mastercraft and a Centurion is going to come down to two things. Number one is the amount of ballast in the boat, and number two is the hull design of the boat. A Centurion has a hull design that's got a lot more V to it, about a 20-degree angle of dead rise towards the back end of the boat. A Mastercraft has a much shallower angle, roughly about 5 degrees. They don't publish the numbers, but if you look at it and really kind of measure it, it's right about that range. But it's much more shallow. Once again, that gives you better wakeboard wake, but on the Centurion, having that V-hole shape to it is going to displace more water at lower speeds. And more importantly, it's going to displace the water to one side of the boat or the other side of the boat more easily, because you actually have a natural shift that can take place because of the V in the bottom. Now, that shift, and for that matter, the shifting of water in any direction behind any of these boats, happens because of the surf system. Mastercraft has their Gen 2 surf system that they've rebranded Surf Star. It's basically the same thing, but it's more of a branding push. But they have their Surf Star system that is a tab style system that the plate goes down, really similar to what Centurion does with their quick surf system. In fact, they share more similarities than they do differences between these two systems. Really, the biggest difference between them is the Mastercraft systems have a couple different flanges that are on the plates. Like they almost look like hooks or grabbers, and that's really kind of what they are. The point of this is to create a combination of a plate that drops down and creates a little bit of lift and tilt, with also a little bit of a grabbing crab type motion. So it's going to reach down and grab and pull and have a similar effect to really what like Malibu does with their surf gate system that goes out the side, or what Nautique does with their NSS system. And so it does a little bit of that. And the reason why they have those plates on there on a Mastercraft is because of the flatter hull shape. If you were to take just a straight flat plate, like what you see on a Centurion, and put it on a flat hull of a Mastercraft, it would not pull and move the boat in the way that you need it to. And that's because the Mastercraft is designed specifically to pull or crab yaw to one side or the other. The Centurion is designed to mainly just shift the flow from going on one side of the boat to going on the other side of the boat, with that V that goes down the middle, and the plate is basically just aiding the hull. Now, why does that matter? What does it do? By having that V hull and having a simpler surf system design, you end up with a surf wave that has two characteristics. Number one is the wave is longer. The second thing, in other words, there's a longer surfable area. The second thing is that the wave has a slightly different feel to it. It's not as soft. It's a lot more firm. And that's because the water is typically going straight behind the boat as opposed to curling and moving to the side. If you surf behind a Mastercraft that's set up properly, it's almost like the wave pulls and like hooks around. It's got a more horizontal shape that fans outwards out to the side of the boat. On a Centurion, it goes more straight backwards, and then it still fans out to the side a little bit, but it's more straight back behind the boat. And what it does is the Mastercraft, you get a little bit more push just on your tail, just kind of like you're riding on an ocean wave that's just pushing you straight across. Where on the Centurion, you're surfing along the face of the wave. There's advantages to each one of these. On the Mastercraft, if you're riding a big buoyant board, it's a little harder to fall out the back of the wave, but you don't get as long of a surfable area, and it's a lot harder to build speed and build traction. On a Centurion, you have a much longer pocket to work with. In fact, it's really not even a pocket. You've got a big old giant bandwidth that you can surf on that's got equal power throughout. And you have the ability to generate a lot more speed coming in on the wave because it's more linear with the boat. So you can just drive straight down the wave. My experience with surfing behind the two boats was stock ballast between, like, let's say an X24 Mastercraft and a Centurion RI-245. The RI-245 surfable wave length is, it's darn near double, if not double plus. Like you've got 25 to 30 feet of surfable wave area, where on a Mastercraft it was 10 to 15 max was what I experienced. And it's mainly just because it started really fanning out. because of the way the surf system and the whole design works together to create those surf waves. So really between them, like I mentioned, Centurion pretty much across the board is going to throw a better surf wave. The Mastercraft is going to do it. It does an okay job. It's a good surfable wave. You can surf behind it. It's not anything incredibly amazing. Like a Centurion FI will outsurf a Mastercraft X24 by a large margin. But it does a great surf wave. And realistically, I would actually rather surf behind a Mastercraft than a lot of other different boats that are out there. So, one other thing I will put a point of note, and this is one thing that both of these boats have in common, because of the way their surf system is designed, you can actually continue to add more weight to them and the wave doesn't break down. So if you wanted to upgrade, let's say, your Mastercraft and put even more weight into it to make it so it surfs better, same thing applies with the Centurion, you can do that with that boat and it's going to be able to handle it. Where on other boats like a Malibu or a Nautique or some others, if you're going to add additional weight, eventually you get to a point where the wave starts to break down and crumble. Really similar to what I mentioned with the Centurion wakeboard wake after you go past max ballast. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the different systems, how they work and operate, things of that nature. Okay, so we covered everything performance-wise. That's a lot to get through, but it's probably the biggest and most important factor. Now, from here, I want to jump into the different interior features of the boat. This is something that a lot of different guys will have some different opinions on. This is just my personal opinion of what I think from my experience with jumping between a bunch of different boats as far as which one different guys do better and how they compare and contrast. So let's talk about interior features and how they're designed overall. So first off, talking about Mastercraft, there's a few places that they do an exceptional job as far as the interiors of the boats and just the overall design and features of them. So a couple of different things they do. They're probably the first and most notable thing is their seat ergonomics, in my opinion, are the best in the industry. Their contours of their seats are just really well done. They're comfortable to sit in, and they're just a really nice overall function and design. Their foam is all. This is both like a good and a bad. Their foam is really soft, and it's really it's something that you go and sit in, particularly in a dealership or a boat show or something like that, and it's just really kind of cushy and soft and nice to sit on. That one's kind of a double-edged sword because it also will have a tendency, especially out on a hot day or over time, will start to wear and will really start make it so that you step on a seat cushion or you sit on it, it will bottom out. So there's good and bad to it, but if you're in a showroom, it's really, really nice. May not necessarily be the case when you're out on the lake when it's 100 degrees, but that is something that they do a really good job at. Couple other things that they do. They have flooring material called Decadence that they have an exclusive for OEM for. In other words, the only manufacturer that has the ability to do it. It's a design that Centurion actually ran for a few years back before Mastercraft had an exclusive on it. I think it's pretty cool. It's kind of like snap-out carpet without the snaps. It looks like a sponge. Some people really hate it, and they don't do it in all the boats. But it's kind of a cool design. You can get it aftermarket, I think, but it is something that you can get, and that is not that I think is a pretty cool way to run your flooring. They also have some really cool other different unique features, like the way that their armrest flip in the bow, just some different things like their wind block / seat design for the walkthrough is kind of cool. They just do a few different cool things like that. My opinion, probably the coolest thing Mastercraft does as far as their design and their interiors is they actually still do a teak platform. I know 99% of people would not want it, and it's actually an upgrade to not do the teak platform. But they're really the only manufacturer at this point that still does an actual wood teak back deck. Maybe it's just because I've been doing this for so long and I'm a little nostalgic, but I think it's pretty cool. That being said, it's maintenance and it's maybe not the most functional thing, but just the fact that they do it, I think is kind of cool. So that kind of covers some different things I think Mastercraft does a really good job of. Probably the most notable one and the biggest thing, like I said, is their seating is just really, really nice. On Centurion's end, kind of jump over to the other end of the spectrum. Centurion does a really nice job in a few areas that I think are superior to Mastercraft's. First off, their driver's seat is quite a bit better. It's more comfortable, it's more functional, it has some other different designs. You can do a 6-way powered seat that you can tilt and move. But even if you just get the basic one, it's just more comfortable, particularly when you flip up the bolster. The bolster is more comfortable. It's more comfortable when you turn around. There's just really no aspects of it that are not. Specifically, if you're a bigger guy, which I'm not, but if you are a bigger guy, Centurion seat is notably more comfortable. You don't feel like you're quite as locked in. Next thing that we can talk about is the flooring that Centurion does. They do Gator step instead of Mastercraft. The two options, you have the Decadence that I mentioned before, but you also have C-Deck, which is kind of the foam flooring design that pretty much everyone else uses. Centurion uses Gator step, which is like a higher grade than what C-Deck runs. It's also got a lot more customization capability. So in a Centurion, you got a lot more different options for like laser etching, different colors, a lot of different things like that. As well as Centurion will go through and wrap that around on the inside. So it protects your gel coat on the interior, makes it so if you have like a board that slides and whacks against the side, you don't have a big scratch or a gouge put in your gel coat. So that part is something that Centurion really does an excellent job at. The other piece is dash systems. So on the Mastercraft X series, if you do the dual screen dash, it's pretty good and it works really well. Centurions, they all basically come with dual screen dash systems standard. So whether you're talking about an FI or an RI series, you've got dual dash screens. You don't have any analog gauges or anything like that, as well as you don't have any of the separate analog switches or things of that nature. So you have the upgraded higher end system that Mastercraft puts in their upgraded X series boats. Is pretty much just the standard that you have in all of the Centurions. As well as I think their dash system is more aesthetically pleasing than Mastercraft's, but that's just a total personal preference thing. Now, talking about there's other areas where there's just some differences, where there's pluses and minuses, but there's not like a clear winner as far as which one does it better. The one that I mentioned before was talking about the foam and the seating. Mastercraft's seat contouring, I think, is the best. When we start talking about materials and how the seats function, that's where it gets to be a little bit more nuanced. So as I mentioned, Mastercraft runs a super soft foam. It's actually a less expensive, lower grade foam that's super duper soft. And it's comfy when you're sitting in a showroom. However, it will bottom out and it will wear out over time. And that's when you end up getting those dragging, drooping seats. You combine this with a vinyl material. So Centurion, in contrast, runs triple density foam that's a lot more firm, particularly in the lower layer. And then the vinyl itself is a lot thicker. Mastercraft runs a super thin vinyl. Centurion runs a really thick, heavy grade vinyl. Part of the reason why they run the really thin vinyl for Mastercraft is the way that they can make it cooler. And they can make it so that they can do their cool touch vinyl. So if you want to do a black vinyl, that is a way to make it so you can have a black interior and have it not really get as hot. Where Centurion, they kind of went the other direction, went to more thick plush vinyl, with their Comfort Strong vinyl that you can have in like the hex pattern that is a lot more robust, is going to hold up way better. Easiest thing to do is you actually can take and pinch the two vinyls, and like if in Mastercraft, you could pinch and twist it and you can tell it like stretches and moves. Which what it's going to mean is it's just not going to hold up nearly as well over time. So you're going to end up having seats that have droops in them. They're going to pool water. They're not going to stay taut. Where on a Centurion, I mean, I've had boats that are 5-7 years old, ones that have hundreds and hundreds of hours on them, and the interior looks almost brand new, just because of the high grade foam as well as the high grade vinyl that goes on top of it. So kind of a wash different ways. Like the Mastercraft's a little more comfortable out of the box. Centurion's going to be more comfortable when you're out in the heat. Centurion's going to hold up better over time. Mastercraft's going to make it so that you can have an all black interior and it's not going to scorch you. You could slide it up underneath the shade of the bimini, which is really neat. It also has a seat back system that you pop in that can that is split, so you can actually step in between the seats, which is kind of neat as well. So there's functionality differences and benefits to one or the other. But the Centurion, and as well as Centurion, when you slide the seat, you're able to maintain the backrest that's back towards the back of the boat as well. So there's pluses and minuses to each one. Functionality wise, if you're going to swap them back and forth a lot, that's where Mastercraft's got the win. If you're going to like slide it forward and leave it there for most of the day and then sit and face backwards, the Centurion is going to be a lot more functional. So there's kind of pluses and minuses either side on that one. Next one is transom seats. So on Centurion, you've got a flip-up mechanism that sits there on the back towards this transom. On the RIs, it's up on the top of the cushion. On the FIs, it's back, and there's kind of like a built-in seat at the back that's got a hatch. The big difference you have is on Centurions, they have a transom storage locker. On Mastercrafts, they elected to remove that and have more integrated seats. This one's a kind of a tricky one. We actually, I've had input and talked about this. I personally would prefer to have the transom, have the lockers, and have more ballast and more storage capacity, and have the flippo so you can lounge and hang out right at the back versus, let's say, integrated lounger seats. But other people are like, oh man, got to have the lounger seats. We use those all the time because we just want to hang out at the lake while the kids are swimming or something. There's pluses and minuses to each one. It just depends on how you're going to use your boat. So, but they both work really well. So basically on one side with Centurion, they opted for more storage, more ballast are the two big factors. And then still have some seat integration there. But quite honestly, the Mastercraft ones are a little more plush and comfortable. Where Mastercraft decided when, hey, we're going to sacrifice storage, we're going to sacrifice ballast to make it so we can have these loungers at the back of the boat. So that's something that you can consider when you're looking between the two. I will say the X Series ones are a lot better designed than the XT Series ones. The XT ones are okay, but the X Series ones are pretty nice. But they do take up a lot of space. So that is something to factor in. Next thing, talking about going along those same lines, talking about storage. As far as the storage is considered, and this gets back to what I was just referring to with the transom seats, Mastercraft has elected to move the vast majority of their storage basically right on the interior of the boat. So in other words, underneath all of the seating. Centurion, on the other hand, has shifted their storage to where they still have a lot of storage underneath seats on the inside, but they have a lot more storage in the rear lockers of the boat, whether that's the transom locker on top of the plug and play bags in the engine lockers or on the sides of the engine. They're just going to have a lot more storage towards the back of the boat. I personally like the storage at the back of the boat just because it gives me the ability to access it while I'm on the swim platform. I don't have to make people stand up and move to like reach in and get a board or get a life jacket or something like that. But there's some people that just really like storage on the inside of the boat under the seats. So it really similar amounts of storage between the two boats, but that's just something of where the storage is located that is a little bit of a factor to consider. And then the last thing is just the dash design. So Mastercraft has, if you opt for the upgraded dual screen system, they have a screen that shows display stuff in front of you above the steering wheel, and then their controls are over here on the right side and kind of down. It's what Centurion used to do back on their old like FS series boats back in like 2015 type era. Versus Centurion has the dual screens. They're kind of right up above the steering wheels on both sides. They're both good designs. Centurions, I like that you don't really have to take your eyes off of what you're doing when you're driving the boat to just make an adjustment really quick. You can see everything really quickly and easily. But I've used both designs. They both work pretty well. Some people have much stronger opinions, one or the other, but they both are a really good system in my opinion. So last thing to talk about is the tower designs. So Centurion typically runs more of a forward swooping tower versus Mastercraft, which has a tower design that is like a reverse arc, so it comes forward a little bit and then swing and then shifts backwards. There's advantages and disadvantages to each one of these different towers. The advantage to the Mastercraft tower are that the bimini can be deployed rather quickly. And the second one is that the tower can be folded really quickly. And that's the case whether you're doing the power tower, the non-power tower, or the above, because it just basically just folds flat down. So that part's pretty slick. The challenges or the negatives, or the benefits, I should say, of Centurion's tower design. The first one is that Centurion has integrated gel coat panels into the tower, so you can take the look of the boat. Like if you have purple metal flake on the outside of the boat, you can have purple metal flake up in the tower, which is pretty slick. The other aspect is that Centurion wins on is a few different things. The bimini shade coverage, if you do have a so long bimini on your Centurion, is a lot more coverage. The bimini is way heavier grade, way stronger, way better, and it takes about 10 seconds longer to put out. So like between the two, bimini on Centurion wins hands down, no question. Same thing if you're doing a shade sail integration. So this is something that the shades that extend, that are basically a bimini extension on a Mastercraft, they come out and then they have poles that come down, snap into the back of the boat. On a Centurion, if you have the so long shade sail, not only do you not have to have those poles, you can actually drive while that 6 shade sail extension is up. So you can be surfing with an 8-foot bimini extension, where on a Mastercraft you can't. The material is a lot better on the Centurions. It's just overall a way higher grade product. The other piece that you have on a Centurion is the board rack design that they run is really pretty cool. So you can do a clamping system from PTM that's similar to Mastercraft clamps. If you've used Mastercraft clamp system, they've got a real tension lock piece that I am not a big fan of. It's fairly reliable from what I understand, but I don't like the way that it functions personally. If you switch over and go into the hook style system, where they're talking about bombshell board racks or skylocks, the ones that we run on Centurions, man, that is one cool board rack. It can just go and slide and clamp and grab the board. You don't have to worry about it damaging boards. You don't have any kind of tension release. Like my 8-year-old daughter can open a board rack and grab the board and slide it back in. So it's really simple. You're not going to have any boards come out of the racks or anything like that. That's another area that Centurion wins hands down, in my opinion. So to that point, what I was kind of getting at, as far as the tower goes, the places where Mastercraft wins is just folding up and down ability. That's going to be the place where it really wins on that end. So the place where Centurion is really going to win is going to be in the aesthetics, which is personal preference, but it's the ability to pull the color of the boat up into the tower directly. The board racks and the bimini system on the Centurions is far superior to what you have with Mastercrafts. So there's pluses and minuses to each one. None of those things with the bimini or a lot of the interior features would really be deal breaker for me. I care about what happens behind the boat way more than anything else. But for some of you that are there, may have a totally different thought and opinion on that. But the one thing to keep in mind is that regardless of what aspect we're talking about, whether it's the inside, the outside, the way it performs or drives, all of those different things, there's going to be areas that each one of these boats is going to do better than the other. And what's important is just finding the pieces that are the most important for you and your family, and what you're going to really care about the most when you're out using the boat. Are you going to be the kind of people that are wanting to just cruise around a boat and just sit and lounge in the boat a lot? Or are you going to be surfing and using it for a lot of the performance aspects a lot more? A question I ask a lot of people when they're talking about the difference between boats is, well, do you want a Porsche or do you want a Bentley? They're both great cars, but they've got kind of a different purpose in mind. And that's something that we experience with these. If we're talking about them, Centurion is a lot more towards the portion of the spectrum. Mastercraft is more towards the Bentley end of the spectrum. Both great cars, both great boats. Just depends on which one you would want to have going out with your family or in your driveway or something along those lines. So that pretty much wraps it up when it comes to it. There's a few other aspects that I can just briefly hit on. As far as it goes, engines, they're really similar between the two. They're both general motor platforms. Ilmor marinizes the one, PCM marinizes the other. They're both great motors and really run the same platforms. They both run 6.2s. They both run 7.4s. There's not any major discrepancy there. Ilmor's not a bad engine. PCM's not a bad engine. They both do a great job, as long as you have the right engine for the boat. That's a bigger factor. The last thing that I want to hit on as far as basically pricing. When we're talking about NXT and Supremes, they're a lot more similar, kind of right in line. The XT series, what we've typically seen is the XT series Mastercrafts ends up coming in at a price point that's just slightly below a Centurion RI. It's a fair bit above a Centurion FI. But that kind of depends on how it's optioned and how it's set up. The Mastercraft X Series boats are coming in at quite a bit more than a Centurion RI from what we've been seeing recently. That didn't necessarily used to be the case. They used to be a lot more right in line, but the pricing in the last few years has really jumped a lot on the Mastercraft, especially on the high-end spectrum. It's jumped up quite a bit. As their sales of the higher-end spectrum boats are actually dropping, their Mastercraft is shifting to where they're selling more and more of the lower-end product and less of the higher-end product, where Centurion is kind of going the opposite direction. Their number one selling boat by far is the RI 245. As that's happened, Mastercraft has continually increased the pricing on their XT and their X Series boats and pushed it up a notch. So really, when you're looking at between them, the FI typically would more compare against the XT Series, the RI against the X Series. But if you're looking at a Mastercraft XT, realistically, you're probably in a similar ballpark with a Centurion RI at this point. Centurion, I mean, you can load out an RI with pretty much every single option, and it's going to still be, probably $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 less than a Mastercraft X Series boat. That would be comparable. So an X24 to an RI 245. So hopefully that gives you a good idea. So this is the case for 2023 model boats. If you're watching this in the future, they may have come out with new features, new designs, new different things that would make some of the stuff I'm saying here irrelevant. But if we're talking about the 2023 model boats, this is what we're experiencing, looking at them right now at this moment. So hopefully this has been helpful information for you. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. I know we went through a lot and got in a lot of the weeds and that, but hopefully this gives you a lot better information. You're a lot better equipped to make decisions, to get the information you want to know. And hopefully you've just been able to learn a lot about these really cool boats. They're both great. And just picking which is the right one is something that's is a definite consideration and something you want to have as much information as you possibly can. So once again, thank you for spending some time with us. We'll see you later.